61 years ago, I made a decision that really has a direct impact on everybody here, including myself. I was finishing my undergraduate degree, and my advisors had convinced me that I should go to graduate school instead of back to the farm. And my advisor had three choices. One was Iowa State, Wisconsin, California Davis. Top of the list was Cal Davis, because that's where he had just done a sabbatical. So I applied to all of them. Fairly quickly, I got accepted at Iowa State and Wisconsin, but I was holding out for Cal Davis. And time went on, and a week or 10 days later, I still hadn't heard. So I let the people at Iowa State know that I would be coming there next year to start graduate school. The next day, guess who sent me a letter? But fortunately or unfortunately, I'm the kind of person that once I kind of make a commitment, I stick with it. So I went to Iowa State, and this is where the impact on all of us comes in. That's where I met my wife, Sylvia, 60 years ago this year. And we've been married for 58 years. If I hadn't gone to Iowa State, there would be no Dr. Kerr. Larry Yancey would not know that I was a doctor, because I probably wouldn't even be here. But more significantly, there would be no Dr. Kerr, because if I were in California, I never would have met my wife and would not have had my daughter, Dr. Kerr. So here I am, and thanks to Dr. Kerr, Larry Yancey found out I was a doctor, and about a month after I had joined this illustrious group, he asked me if I would do a presentation about health and safety. And I wasn't so sure. And then a few months ago, he asked, could you do the presentation in March on health and safety? And I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. And a few weeks later, he asked me again after I said, you're very persistent, aren't you? And well, I'll be honest. My hesitation was I couldn't get my head around how the hell do you put together a presentation on health and safety in the workshop. But I have this philosophy that if you're going to be part of a group, you need to participate. So I worked out some things, and I finally came up with what you're going to be subjected to this evening, and hopefully it'll be helpful. And as I have said, I have never gone to any presentation where I didn't come away with at least one important point. So if you get one important point out of this, then I will feel very gratified. So this is the topic, health and safety in the workshop. Before we go to the next slide, my granddaughter came, during COVID, she was assigned to do a project and then to give a report on how she put that project together. And so she came from Maryland to where we were in South Carolina, worked in my wood shop, and we decided a good project for her to do would be to make a picture frame. Use different tools, use wood, put it together. Fairly simple project, but if you think about it, it's complex enough that it's a decent experience for a kid to start out with. At least that was my opinion. So she has to give an introduction. You're not going to be subjected to her entire presentation, although I would be happy to let you see it. But when we get to the point where she says, let's get started, we will cut it off. But I think if we have the audio, we're in good shape. If you don't have the audio, I'll at least tell you what she's saying.
Welcome to my grandpa's workshop. Today I'll be showing you how to make a picture frame out of wood. For this, you will need a long piece of wood, a planer, a drum sander.
Okay, welcome to my grandpa's workshop. We need a piece of wood. We need all of these tools. By the way, you're looking at the inside of my shop in Rock Hill.
Some wood glue.
We need glue,
a pencil and a ruler.
a pencil, a ruler,
Some hand sanders.
sandpaper,
A clamp.
clamps,
A
multi-tool,
a router table,
router
bits,
table and some router
and a finishing
bits.
station. But most
A
importantly,
finishing station,
you're gonna need
there's the
safety
frame she
equipment.
made.
So,
And most
safety
significantly, we
goggles,
need safety.
your
We
hearing
need
protection,
goggles. We need hearing
the air
protection.
filter,
We need an
and
air
a dust
filter
collector.
and a dust
let's get
collector.
started.
So let's get started.
Gather all your materials. The frame
So
will
that's
hold
my
a 5x6
introduction. We can stop there. All right, next. Anybody unfamiliar with this? Be sure you know what you're doing, follow the rules. I'm not trying to just be funny by putting it up there, but I think that's a very significant way to start this presentation. Use common sense. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it, and work safely. That's what we're going to try to get at this evening. Next. I started with, as I said, I tried to put this together. So I started with the environment. Place for everything, everything in its place. I think an organized workshop is also safer than an unorganized workshop with stuff that you're falling over. You can't find something, so you reach and get yourself in trouble. I think you should keep your workshop organized. Lighting is important, whether it's the general lighting or task lighting. Even a headlight may be useful for some of the things. I have a task light that clamps to the end of my lathe for some of the hollow turning so that I can actually see inside of the vessel that I'm turning. And I think that's all helpful. Ladders. I have 5 different ladders in my workshop, and I use every one of them. I have 2 that are about 2 steps, and I use one just for rotating the paddles on my dust collector on the pleated filter on top. I have another that I use to get things off the wall. I have a step ladder that I use to get things a little higher. For cleaning the air filter, I have one of these, the little giant type step ladders that you can get up on. And I have 11-foot ceilings, so I even have some shelving that's fairly high up, and I have a 16-foot extension ladder. And I think that's very useful for me, and I think it's important that they're in good condition. And you set them up, don't just throw the extension ladder against the wall. Make sure that it's at the right angle, make sure that the bottom is flat. Turn off your cell phones, and that was a joke, okay. I was not offended.
But he's swinging his stick at it.
Well, I'm speaking softly, but make sure you have enough circuits. You shouldn't be using 15-amp circuits in the workshop. In South Carolina, the only thing in the whole area was 15-inch circuits, so I ran conduit with 20-amp circuits, and I had 2 different circuits in the workshop because every once in a while, if the dust collector was running and I turned on another tool, it would trip the circuit, even with the 20-amp. So the next step is, if you're running 2 tools at the same time, it's a good idea to have them hooked into different circuits, because having the circuit trip while you're in the middle of pushing something through the table saw might not be a very good situation. And make sure that the extension cords are not something you're going to trip over. I make sure if I use extension cords, and I do fairly liberally actually, make sure that you pick them up as soon as you've used them. And in my shop, the only tools that I don't unplug after using are the dust collector and the air filter. Everything else I unplug every time I'm finished using it. Even the table saw. That's always been true. I think this may not be that good, maybe for health and not safety, but comfort with heating, cooling. Whether you've got a fan or a fan with a homemade dust collector type of fan. But it should be clean and free of hazards. I don't need to explain that, I don't think, but something to keep in mind. But distractions from people, pets, and the media should be on your mind. I, for one, could never work with the radio running in the shop. I would not be able to concentrate on the job at hand fully. Some people use noise cancellation devices, which, by the way, are not a form of hearing protection, but I think they can all be distracting. I leave it to you, but that's my philosophy. And even people, one time I was working on something, my wife came into the shop, came right behind me, and scared the hell out of me, really. I mean, I jumped. If I had been working on something with a sharp object, I might have been in real trouble. So,
Do you lock the door now? I'm sorry to do that.
yeah.
I had my granddaughter walk in on me, and I was running to solve, and she scared the crap out of me because walked in and I wouldn't expect that.
Exactly, and so maybe if you all go home tonight and think about what could happen in my shop, maybe I've made a point that's worthwhile, because I think people have had this experience. Next. HENT, I ought to put some medical jargon in here. Head, eyes, ears, nose, and throat. You know, on the when you do a physical exam on somebody, the first is general. This irascible old 82-year-old ORF is walking, talking, and otherwise obnoxious. Mental status is next. He's crazy. And then HENT, head, eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Normal cephalic, eyes equal and equal movement, so on. So HENT, safety glasses. A lot of us get by with prescription safety glasses. Fact is, it is better to have something with a side shield on. And these are both versions. So if you're getting along with safety glasses, this one doesn't fit over it. This does fit over the safety glasses. And you can get other cocoon type glasses and so on. So you can actually get safety glasses with side shield attachments. I had one pair once and could never figure out how to get them fitted on. So as I say, do as I say, not as I do, maybe, but think about having better safety glasses than just the prescription ones.
Even with side shields, the dust can get around.
Right.
Your eyes, too. I've had that happen.
Right. And for hearing protection, it should be either muffs or earplugs. And if you buy a pair, if they're really meant for hearing protection, they will have a NRR rating, as it shows you here. And noise cancellation devices are not acceptable. In fact, I got some literature off the internet. There's a sign. This just kind of came up from, I think, UMass workshop. Yeah, UMass Amherst. Noise cancellation devices are not allowed in the workshop, whatever workshop they're talking about. It has to be either the NRR rated muffs or fitted earplugs. And there's other information that you can work at 85 dBA up to 8 hours, considered safe. Most shop tools are around 100 to 110 dBA. And so the number of hours you can be subjected to that is much less than the 8 hours. And probably, I don't need to go on, everybody knows you need good hearing protection. And I know the recommendation is not noise cancellation, earmuffs, or these. I did learn one thing, that the actual reduction is the NRR -7 divided by 2. This one says 26, so you take 26 minus 7 is 19 divided by 2, so you're only getting a 9 or whatever NRR out of it, or a reduction, but they're considered acceptable by OSHA and others, so I'll go with that.
Is that
But
decibels?
yeah, yes, and
Just
the
for-
other,
Just for reference, 120 is a threshold of pain.
yes, right, and if you use this plus the earplugs, you can get an additional 5. Okay. A face shield. I had one in here. I didn't bring it. I don't need to show you what a face shield looks like. Have them up here. Dust mask should be N95 or better. This is N95. My grandkids, when they're in the shop, wear one of these. They wear earplugs, and they wear one of these, or one of these, as you saw in the film. I happen to like this one. It's the Ellipse P100 mask, and the nice thing is it has changeable filters on the side. They sell them here. I'm not trying to sell this one. As I said, it works great for me. And actually, the more it plugs up, the better protection you have. So it's not that you got to keep it clean, except for the fact you do want to be able to breathe in, and then you breathe out through the device here. What's so funny?
I was watching a video, they were asking somebody the questions, and they said, well, how do I know when to change my filters? And he's like, well, if you're having difficulty breathing, that might be an indication.
See, somebody agrees with me.
Very, I've had a lot of experience with masks, dust collectors, respirators, and those are the most comfortable respirators you can buy as a,
I really like them.
What was the name of it again, sir?
I'm sorry?
What was the name of that one?
It's the Ellipse P100. They do sell it here at Woodcraft. They come in 2 different sizes, and I have no way to know which one I would recommend for you. I doubt if you can fit them, but and then if you're going to go out and get your own wood, you probably want to have a helmet. Okay. So anyhow, next. Let's talk a little bit about wood. It can be an irritant. Too much dust. My daughter, this famous ENT surgeon, and I didn't mention that not only would I not have been identified, probably wouldn't be here, because she wouldn't have been here to tell me that I was too old, feeble, and incompetent to stay in South Carolina, which is why I'm here. She told me I had to move, and after talking to my 93-year-old cousin, she said, yes, you move or they will move you. So here we are. Anyhow, she has told me to point out that there is actually a sinus cancer that develops from people that are overexposed to wood as an irritant, not as an allergen or as a toxin, but just the irritation of the wood. I have to take her word for that. It can be allergenic, and it can be a toxin, it can be a hazardous missile. And how do you manage the dust? Well, I think we've kind of covered that, but a dust mask, dust collector, air filtration. When you're cleaning up your shop, instead of using the leaf blower to blow the dust out, it's probably better to use suction or a broom and not stir up the dust to have it circulate around the rest of the area. And of course, the other option is to work outdoors. I brought a little bit of information just to show you how my shop is set up now. Actually, it's almost identical. You saw how big that shop was in South Carolina, right? and I had air filtration, I had a dust collector. All my tools are on wheels. The table saw is on wheels, but it's not mobile. So this sits here, the chop saw sits back here, and the dust collector is here. Everything else, the planer, jointer, sanding center, scroll saw, belt sander, CNC machine, router table, they're all on wheels. And in general, I move them around to here, and I'll show you how I connect them to this dust collector, and then I put them back in place when I'm done. Helps keep the shop organized and all that too. Getting back to what I said earlier. Chop saw sits back here in South Carolina. I had this nice enclosure built with dust collector connection that I could run over here. For here, I opted to get one of the chop shop things, and it works great. That's how I handle the dust collection from the for the miter saw. Everything, and this workbench is on wheels. Everything, even these, I move the band saws out to hook to the dust collector. Next slide. This just shows that. Just like in South Carolina, I had the table saw hooked up. It is stationary and has a connection to the dust collector. Next slide. So this is the connection to the table saw with a gate. And then I have a connector. This is a flexible hose that I can bring to the equipment that's sitting over here, or a couple of pieces I use over here, and my lathe is sitting over here on the other side of the table saw, and this actually hooks to a big gulp type of thing that works behind the lathe. And if it doesn't take a 4-inch fitting, I have a 2.5-inch adapter that just connects to this, and this serves two purposes. One is it hooks to some of the tools. One of the band saws has a 2.5-inch fitting. The sanding center has a 2.5-inch fitting. But also I can use this to hand clean some of the dust that's left over that's not collected otherwise. And then finally I have this small rockler fitting that I can use on my hand tools, especially. Probably the only one I really use it on is, remember there's this table sitting behind the table saw that I do hand sanding there, and I will connect this to the hand sander. There's actually, my understanding is, you get better function of your hand sanding if you have it hooked to dust connection, because it keeps the abrasive clean, so it does a better job of sanding. So it serves two purposes. Now the other option is, remember the door is over here, so when it's possible, I just take the hand sander out here on a table and work outside. Next slide, please. All right.
If you have a hand sander, an orbital sander with a port on it, a CPAP hose is just about the right size to put over that hand sander, and then you duct tape it onto a 2.5-inch connecting in a shop vac, and you get great dust control.
All right. And the other one works very well too. About a year ago, Fine Woodworking published an article about wood toxins, etc. So I took apart their article, and these are the ones they consider benign: apple ash, alders except black, aspens, chestnut, poplar, cherry, pear, beeches, true firs, basswoods, maples, and the red and white oaks. And after I looked at that for a while, it occurred to me, you can do a heck of a lot if these are the only woods you use. There's a good variety of woods. I've never, except for cherry, I've never found any good fruit woods to use, but I understand apple is a really good wood, and so on. So, as I said, if you want to only work with benign woods, I would argue that you can do a lot if that's all you want to use. on the next slide, I've listed the ones that they've, there are a few, they're all allergenic, and I'm not going to read the list. I'll leave it there for a minute. I have never used Afromosia, by the way, but yeah, I've used a lot of those. Well, this does not mean you should not use them. It means you should use good dust protection, and you should probably wear a dust mask when you're working with those, even before you get to the sanding phase.
And long sleeve.
Right.
They can get on your
Right.
skin.
Yes,
over
they
a
can.
period of time.
Yes.
Mine wear a little.
Right.
A little.
Thank you.
So I had to wear a long sleeve.
Well, that's a good question. How long should you wear sleeves? Because you should wear short sleeves for turning, as we'll get to later. But instead of debating that, because I'm not sure I have the answer, let's move on to the toxic woods. And it's a fairly short list. And I added a couple here. I don't know if, actually, children have died of camphor from the medicinal preparations that were available in the house, so it is a toxin. Plywood has toxins holding it together, at least some does. Pallet wood, be careful. Some of these are really treated with some pretty toxic substances that you don't want to work with. A methyl bromide, I believe, is one of them. I don't know what else. And pressure-treated wood probably is not the most ideal to be breathing the dust from. So those are ones where you'd want to use protect the skin, faces, and airways when you're milling and sanding these. And I probably wouldn't use them for toys or cookware.
So I know with pressure-treated wood, I don't bring that out to the fire pit to burn.
Right.
But we do burn pallet wood. Is that a problem?
I can't answer you other than to say, first off, it would depend on which pallet wood it is, because not all pallet wood is treated. So I can't answer that. What do we got next? Nick?
I didn't see walnut in that list.
Yeah, it's black walnut's in there. I think it's under the allergenic, isn't it? Back.
Oh, yeah.
Black walnut, yeah.
I'll put a W.
All right. Next. Tools. Some of this is common sense, but I started my first slide said use common sense. So they should be in good condition and well maintained. Sharp is safer than dull. And clean, lubricate, change filters, and polish the surfaces. And I think I do recommend that you try to keep your table saws and your bandsaw surfaces, the jointer and a planer, so that when you're trying to move a piece of wood through that equipment, it's not going to get stuck and lead to problems. Within some reason, I would say, mainly because I heard it from somebody else, that it's easier to work on small projects with large tools than it is to work on large projects with small tools. So think about that. For comfort and ergonomics, you should be working at the right height. Actually, a table is not always, a single table is not always at the right height for everything you're going to do. And sometimes it's good to have a second table or worktop that you could put on top of your workbench for comfort and remember, this is health and safety. Yes.
I saw a video of a guy that took the same regular table like this and put 2-inch PVC links underneath it to raise it up. He wasn't putting much weight on it, but had the ability to lift up any old table to whatever height he wanted just by cutting 4 lengths of
Right.
2-inch PVC. Again,
So you can
Don't
raise
know.
the table rather
Exactly.
than set another one on top. Exactly.
but you not add too much weight to that because
I even seen one video where they made a bench top where they could adjust it with a car jack.
Yeah.
Crank up the car jack, he'd be sure that he put it, drill in, raise the table height up,
Right.
while he wanted to, down, or with a drill, turn it on.
Well, so one way or another, be able to work at different heights depending on the job you're doing. Proper use of guards, push sticks. We could do a whole talk on working with small pieces, small parts, jigs, and everything like that, and I'm not going to do it tonight, don't worry. But jigs for small pieces and other safety devices, that's probably another talk all by itself. But and I guess the other aspect of that I would point out is if you're making a cove molding or something, you take a wide piece of wood, run it through the router table, and then strip off the piece of molding that you want to use rather than to take a thin piece and try to run it through the router table, things like that. Or do your shaping on a large piece and then cut off a small piece to make KISS, make it more simple. This one I'm going to spend a little bit of time because round pieces on the bandsaw should be really well secured, no question about it. And there are 2 options. One is if you want to cut off the end of a piece, this type of device, they're commercially available. In fact, one made by Carter is on sale here at Woodcraft right now for sliding through the bandsaw. The only disadvantage to this one is if the piece is smaller than this, it's not really going to be secured. So if you make your own jig, make sure that you have a way to accommodate different diameters of pieces for getting them through the bandsaw or the table saw. Or when you're cutting up your wood with a chainsaw, before you even bring it into the shop, be sure you have a stand that will hold it securely so it's not going to roll. And the other direction is to go this way. I just bought, instead of trying to make my own. The problem with this one was easy to make because I didn't really need much adjustment. But for this one, you need to be able to move this in and out, and the log fits in like this, and you can use it for slicing. You can actually use this for cutting slabs. And when I say slabs, I'm talking about small slabs, but you may want small slabs. In fact, that's why when I made this, I was practicing for something I plan to do in the future where I plan to run a round piece of wood through, wind up with a piece of wood that I can use for spindle turning. So these are 2 different jigs that accomplish 2 different things that you need to be able to do when you're preparing wood for use on the lathe. Next. For finishing, I have to cover that a little bit. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the directions for the finishes you're using. And I think it's good to get a little understanding of what's going on with the finishes you're using. Don't use food and beverage containers. It's not good for a kid to gulp down a bottle of Coke, and turns out it was really lighter fluid for the barbecue. Has happened, I understand. Fortunately, I've never had that one come up. Good ventilation when you're working with different finishes. Safety glasses and skin protection. The recommendation is that nobody should be doing these Lichtenberg fractals, they were a fad, what, 3 or 4 years ago in wood turning. People would take their pieces in and hook them up to a high voltage thing, and they get these, looks like lightning coming down through the burned pieces, and people died. My understanding is the AAW will not accept any pieces that have been subjected to the Lichtenberg fractals, right? Right. Interestingly, I stopped at a craft place down in North Carolina a few months ago, and somebody was selling Lichtenberg fractal pieces there. So I said something to the manager of the store, and then this lady came up and says, well, my husband makes those and he knows what he's doing. He's safe. He won't let anybody in the shop with him, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, it's a risky procedure. What can I say? Fuming is a process. I'm not saying don't do it, but I am saying depending on, and I guess there are different techniques to acquire real fuming of oak to change it or make it look like it's been fumed or whatever. Just know what you're doing is what I would highly recommend. That's all.
I've done the fuming with
I know you have. That's why I was careful how I presented it.
yeah, 30% ammonia to the fume. You gotta be careful what you do. That's absolutely correct. If you think through it right, you can do it, but if you don't know how to deal with it, don't.
That's my recommendation. Oily rags need special care. Do I need to say more? We all know that they have to be taken care of. Here's one thing. I'm sorry.
I work for a paint company, and I gotta tell you, there have been more fires in backyards, closets, basements. On the 23rd floor of a skyscraper in New York, the painter was using Danish oil, which we've all used, wadded up his stuff, and burned the entire 23rd floor of a high-rise because he left that night, threw him in the corner, and by midnight, that spontaneously combusted. And it's only natural oils that do that. It's not polyurethane and that stuff. But you got to be real careful because you can take your house out overnight, just like that.
Well, my understanding is when King Tut was embalmed, he was wrapped with oily rags, and the evidence is that there was combustion of those rags, which damaged his carcass. So if you're embalming anybody, keep that in mind. Yes.
If you're using oil and you have paper towels, is that worse than the rags?
I'll give her
Do the
that.
same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing?
It's the oil that is oxidizing in a balled up area where the heat builds up, and whether it's rags or paper, it's the oil that combusts and causes that fuel to burn.
Yeah, it's the oil.
Now, how, I use paper towels, and I use like walnut oil,
Right?
Yeah.
and so how do I take care of the what do I need to do with
Take them outside and put them up flat outside in the outside where they can cool, keep cool.
Flatten them out.
or a
and-
metal?
Or you put them in a metal bucket of water.
I have a
Well, yeah, there are a couple options. One is get a metal bucket, and with water is extra. And if you're going to wad them up, they need to be in something like that. But the main thing is, as long as you flatten them out and probably put them outside until they're dry, that's all you really need to do. But it applies to any oil that you use.
I have a chain link fence that runs inside my shop. And I would take them out there and throw them over the chain link fence, spread them out so they can dry out.
Absolutely. That's right.
Then I take
So the main thing is, do not wad them up and leave them inside. What else can I say? And here's another, I hadn't thought of this, but it was in one of the, I did a little research, believe it or not, to come up with all this. And sparks can ignite solvents, that makes sense, but steel wool too. So keep that in mind. Next. In the woods, some people do go out tree to a bowl, so I would recommend the following. Make sure somebody knows you're there. Wear protective gear, helmet, glasses, hearing protection, and protective clothing. And I would recommend, just like with everything else, you should have good equipment that's in good condition with sharp blades and a chainsaw that's appropriate for the job. And the other equipment that's appropriate for the job too, because I've got some logs that I cannot lift in my yard. I've got some others that take a little bit of extra effort to lift, and I probably shouldn't be trying to lift those, but I could. So just keep that in mind. That it's not the ones you can't lift, it's the ones that you can lift, but maybe they're a little bit heavier than you should be dealing with. So remember, you can always use a plane. Remember your physics, an inclined plane is a way to reduce things, chain hoist, whatever. Personal safety, you're in the workshop, do your children know where you are? When we were living in Maryland, in the DC area, at 10 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are? So that's sort of a backwards on that. So, appropriate attire for work, no loose clothing. What else can I say? I guess common sense fits here. Jewelry.
Long hair.
It's probably good to have some means of communication. Fatigue, if you're trying, say you're trying to continue making, to see what is the smallest goblet with a captured ring that you can make, and you're getting a little bit tired, maybe you should continue the next day rather than go on to that next goblet. Know what you're doing. Dry run would fit with that. Everybody says have a medical kit. I'm not sure what you would use more than Band-Aids and gauze, because stopping bleeding is probably about the best you can do. Maybe an eye wash of some kind would be helpful. Probably a fire extinguisher. Next. Personal safety at the lathe, comfort, height of the lathe. I like using an anti-fatigue mat or whatever you want to call it on the floor. No loose sleeves, no long hair, no jewelry. Unfortunately, including wedding bands, they can be a hazard in two different ways. One is the wedding band can get caught. The other is if you injure your finger and there's a wedding band on there and it gets swollen later, it may be some problem getting the wedding band off or causing more damage to the finger from that. Eye protection, a face shield at the least, and again, the demonstrators at the AAW have to wear at least a face shield. We've talked about dust protection, and I use Dr. Scholl's in my shoes just to be comfortable. Next. What? That's one of those things that sits behind a lathe and is connected to a dust collector, and it collects the sawdust, the wood dust. Notice there shouldn't be sawdust, it should be wood dust that we're dealing with, right? What? Next. Go ahead. I think there's another one. Oh, before you start the lathe, is the wood sound? Should you be using that piece of wood? Is the lathe stable? Is it sitting squarely? Is the piece mounted securely? We had a little discussion of that tonight. Faceplate, screw center, tailstock engaged, should always be engaged if possible. Do you need a steady rest? think about that. Loose tools or other items appropriately stowed. And last month, I know we heard about somebody had some problems with loose tools falling off the lathe while it was in operation. My recommendation is they shouldn't be sitting on the bed of the lathe, and they shouldn't be sitting so that you have to reach over the lathe to get to them. And they're safely within reach. And everything is locked down with the tool rest at the appropriate setting and locked in place and clear. Be sure, 2 things before you start the lathe. One is to turn the wood without the engine on or the motor on, and make sure that that it's unlocked so it'll turn when you turn the switch. Next. When you do start it with a slow speed. Stand out of the line of fire. Should be minimal vibrations, and the glued pieces are stable. Next. Here's something on safe lathe speed. Pieces 2 to 24 inches diameter. If you take the diameter times the RPM, should be equal to or less than 6,000 when you're starting, and maybe up to 9,000 after it's around. For instance, a 20-inch diameter piece could turn at 300 RPM when you're starting it up. After it's round, if you're using 9,000, a 14-inch piece could turn at this rate. I cut that off at 2 decimals. So if it's less than 2 inches, up to 3,500 RPM is considered okay, at least for the reference I got, and it kind of makes sense to me. That's why I'm using it. You may have different. And the one thing I learned is, even with these DVRs, there are 2 belts in there, and that you should adjust the belt. This doesn't have anything to do, I guess, with health and safety, but adjust the belt to the lowest range for your speed, and you get better torque. So that was just an extra gem. I think, start slowly. If it feels unsafe, it probably is. Here, this comes in, never lean or reach over the machine, tool rest, height and distance appropriate, and stop the lathe to adjust your tool rest. Tools should be sharp and big enough. In other words, when your tool rest, the distance to the lathe, the distance to the piece, the longer the distance, the more leverage the piece of wood has against you. And some of the pieces are actually marked. At least the Easy Wood hollowing tools have a mark that tell you what is the maximum overreach that you can use, and it'd be good to keep that in mind. With hollowing, you may need to use a special tool rest so you can get the tool in place without having too much leverage, or use a hollowing system. I recommend using dust control. The big gulp came up when sanding. And do not wrap cloths or sandpaper or other things around your fingers. Beware of sharp edges and projections on the turned piece. Is that it? I think that's it, right? No. If it feels unsafe, it probably is. Never lean or reach over the machine. I'm being redundant here. No, that's the same thing. That is the last one. That's not redundance. That's old age. All right. At least I recognized it. So. Comments, questions?
I have a comment. First of all, I appreciate your demo. I really do. I personally take safety for granted, much to my detriment. But I'd like to reinforce, or I'd like to support everything you've said with just a couple of very quick but true stories. When I was with Woodcraft, there was a customer that came in, and we spent a lot of time together because he was a fellow turner, but he was not a member of Richmond Wood Turners. Unfortunately, it's been years and long enough now where I forget his name, but he started developing some symptoms. Runny nose, and his eyes would water, and then his sinuses would start to hurt, and they found out that doing a biopsy of his sinuses, that there was a fungus growing in his sinuses, and the doctors were perplexed because it only grew in one country in the world, in South America. And what they finally figured out was that he bought a piece of wood that from that country that happened to have a spore on it, and he inhaled it, and it started growing in his sinuses, and unfortunately, the fungus was stronger than he was. The second story is, we had another customer come in, and he had a shop that wasn't heated, and he was out working in his shop, and he had a heavy coat on and was working with a radial arm saw. And the saw blade caught his sleeve and ultimately severed his arm. And he couldn't call his wife, who was just 100 feet away in the house, because his cell phone was in the pocket on the side that the arm was severed, and he bled out. So take your cell phones out. The third is, thank you, Mr. Bishop. Before I was with Woodcraft, I had 28 years with the commercial insurance industry. And I can't tell you how many buildings have burned down because of oily rags. It's a real serious issue.
It is.
So treat your oily rags carefully. So thank you. This was a very good demo. I appreciate it.